The galaxy was old. Older than most species could understand. Stars had been born and died 1,000 times over, and civilizations had risen and fallen like waves on an endless ocean. But some stories survived longer than stars. Some legends refused to die. In the great halls of the Syndicate of Worlds, scholars kept records of everything. They wrote about wars and treaties, about conquered peoples and fallen empires. They cataloged every species that had ever traveled between the stars. And buried deep in their oldest archives, locked away in vaults that few were permitted to enter, they kept records of the Terrans, the humans. Chancellor Vorath had ruled the Syndicate for 200 years. His species lived for centuries, and he had spent every one of those years building his power. Under his command, the Syndicate controlled 47 star systems. They had enslaved entire species, forcing them to work in mines and factories until their bodies gave out. They had burned worlds that resisted, and made examples of anyone who dared to challenge them. Vorath feared nothing. He had crushed rebellions, executed rivals, and silenced every voice that spoke against him. He sat upon his throne in the orbital palace above Syndicate Prime, looking down at the galaxy he controlled, and he believed himself invincible. But even Vorath had heard the old stories. When he was young, before he had risen to power, his teachers had told him about the Terrans. They spoke of creatures from a death world, a planet of crushing gravity and extreme temperatures and endless violence. The humans had evolved in that nightmare, and it had made them into something terrible. They could survive wounds that would kill any other species. They could fight for hours without rest. They formed bonds with each other so strong that they would die rather than abandon their companions. And they had once walked among the stars. 10,000 years ago, according to the old records, the Terrans had built an empire of their own. They had explored the galaxy, made alliances, and fought wars. They had been neither the largest nor the most advanced civilization, but they had been respected. Other species had learned quickly that humans were not to be challenged lightly. Then the Syndicate's ancestors had made a decision. They had seen the humans as a threat, a species that might one day grow powerful enough to challenge their dominance. So they had created a weapon, a biological poison designed specifically for human biology. They had deployed it secretly, spreading it through human colonies and ships and stations. Billions of humans had died. The survivors had retreated to their homeworld, a blue planet called Earth, to quarantine themselves and fight the plague. The Syndicate had expected them to die there, alone and forgotten. They had erased most records of the attack, buried the evidence, and let time do the rest. Generations passed. The humans never returned to the stars. Eventually, they became legends, then myths, then nothing more than stories told to frighten children. Vorath had always dismissed those stories. He was a practical creature, concerned with power and control, not ancient fairy tales. When his advisors mentioned the Terrans, he laughed at them. When scholars suggested that the old records should be studied, he ignored them. The humans were dead or trapped on their poisoned world. They were no threat to anyone. But not everyone agreed with the Chancellor. Deep in the archives of Syndicate Prime, a young archivist named Seleth spent his days organizing ancient documents. He was a quiet creature, small and frail by Syndicate standards, better suited for books than for politics. He had no power and no ambition. He simply loved knowledge. One day, while cataloging a collection of damaged records recovered from an abandoned outpost, Seleth found something strange. It was a personal journal written by a Syndicate military commander who had lived 10,000 years ago. The journal described events that had been erased from official history. It described the war against the Terrans. Seleth read with growing horror. The commander had witnessed the biological attack firsthand. He had watched human colonies die, seen the bodies pile up, observed the survivors fleeing toward their homeworld. But the journal did not celebrate the victory. Instead, it expressed fear. The humans had not surrendered, the commander wrote. They had not begged for mercy or tried to negotiate. They had simply retreated, gathering their survivors, protecting their wounded, and disappearing into the darkness between stars. And as they left, they had broadcast a single message across all frequencies. We will remember. The commander had spent the rest of his life waiting for the humans to return. He had studied everything he could find about their species, learning about their history and their psychology and their capabilities. And he had written a warning for future generations. The Terrans are not like other species, the journal said. They do not forget injuries. They do not forgive betrayals. They form grudges that last for generations, passed down from parent to child like sacred obligations. If they survive the plague, they will return. And when they return, they will bring war such as the galaxy has never seen. Seleth brought the journal to Chancellor Voreth immediately. He believed it was his duty to warn the Syndicate's leader about this potential threat. He expected gratitude, perhaps even a reward for his discovery. Instead, Voreth had him arrested. The Chancellor declared that Seleth was spreading dangerous propaganda, trying to undermine the Syndicate's authority with ancient myths. The journal was confiscated and destroyed. Seleth was executed publicly, a warning to anyone else who might try to resurrect dead legends. Voreth returned to his throne, satisfied that he had handled the matter. The humans were gone. They had been gone for 10,000 years. They would never return. 3 months later, a sensor station on the edge of Syndicate space detected something unusual. A ship had emerged from faster-than-light travel at coordinates that should have been empty. The ship's design matched nothing in the Syndicate's databases. Its hull was angular and aggressive, built for war rather than commerce. The station commander hailed the unknown vessel, demanding identification. The response came in a language that the computer struggled to translate. It was harsh and direct, filled with consonants and short syllables. When the translation finally processed, the station commander felt his blood run cold. "This is Commander Nate Dawson of the Terran Reclamation Fleet. We have come to collect a debt 10,000 years overdue. Surrender is not expected. Mercy will not be given. We remember what you did to us." Behind the first ship, dozens more began appearing, then hundreds. The darkness of space, filled with vessels bearing the symbol of a blue and green world. The humans had returned, and they had come for war. Commander Nate Dawson stood on the bridge of the Reckoning and watched the enemy station through the main view screen. It was a massive structure, bristling with weapons and shields, designed to guard the border of Syndicate space against any threat. 50 warships floated around it, their crews scrambling to battle stations. Nate was a tall man with gray at his temples and scars on his hands. He had spent 30 years in the military, rising through the ranks on skill and determination. He had trained his entire life for this moment. Every human had. For 10,000 years, humanity had survived. The biological weapon had killed billions, but it had not killed everyone. The survivors had retreated to Earth, sealing themselves away from the galaxy while they fought the plague. Generations had lived and died in quarantine, struggling against a disease that seemed designed to destroy them completely. They refused to die. Scientists had worked for centuries to develop a cure. When that failed, they had worked to develop resistance. Generation after generation, the survivors had grown stronger, their bodies adapting to the poison that flowed through their blood. Children were born with natural immunity. The plague became manageable, then survivable, then merely a memory. And while they healed, they planned. The history of the Syndicate's betrayal was passed down through families like a sacred text. Parents told their children about the billions who had died, about the worlds that had burned, about the ancestors who had been murdered in cold blood. No one was allowed to forget. No one was allowed to forgive. They rebuilt their civilization from the ruins. They developed new technologies, built new ships, trained new soldiers. They watched the galaxy from afar, studying their enemies, learning their weaknesses. And they waited for the day when they would be strong enough to return. That day had finally come. Commander Lisa Brennan stood beside Nate, studying the tactical display. She was younger than him, with sharp eyes and a quick mind. She had graduated at the top of her class and earned her position through excellence. Like every human, she carried the weight of 10,000 years of rage. "The Syndicate border station is hailing us again," she reported. "They are demanding that we identify ourselves and surrender." Nate smiled coldly. Humans had a particular kind of smile, one that showed their teeth. Other species found it disturbing. It reminded them of predators. "Open a channel," he said. The view screen flickered, and the image of a Syndicate commander appeared. He was a large creature, insectoid in appearance, with compound eyes and mandibles that clicked nervously as he spoke. "Unknown vessels, this is Commander Therax of the Syndicate Defense Force. You have entered sovereign territory. Identify yourselves immediately, or you will be destroyed." Nate stepped forward. "I am Commander Nate Dawson of the Terran Reclamation Fleet. 10,000 years ago, your ancestors poisoned our world and murdered billions of our people. We have come to collect what is owed." Therax's mandibles stopped clicking. His compound eyes seemed to widen. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he laughed, a harsh chattering sound. "Terrans? Humans? Those are children's stories. Your species died out 10,000 years ago." "We survived," Nate said simply, "and we remember." Therax regained his composure. "I do not know who you really are, or what you hope to accomplish, but you are outnumbered and outgunned. Surrender now, and I may show mercy." Nate looked at Lisa. She gave him a small nod. "Humans do not surrender," Nate said. "We do not beg for mercy. We came here to deliver a message, and your station will be that message. Every world in the Syndicate will know that humanity has returned." He terminated the communication. The battle began moments later. The Syndicate ships moved into attack formation, confident in their superior numbers. They had 50 warships against the human fleet of 200, but they believed that their technology and experience would win the day. They were wrong. Human ships flew differently than other vessels. They accelerated faster, turned sharper, and performed maneuvers that seemed impossible. The reason was simple but terrifying. Humans had evolved on a heavy gravity world. Their bodies could withstand forces that would crush other species. Their pilots could pull turns that would turn alien crews into paste. The first Syndicate ship exploded within 30 seconds of the battle beginning. Then the second. Then the third. Commander Therax watched in disbelief as his fleet was torn apart. Human fighters weaved through his formation like predators hunting prey. They took hits that should have destroyed them and kept fighting. When their ships were too damaged to fly, the pilots ejected and were recovered by other vessels. They never gave up. They never retreated. Sergeant Cole Bradley led a squad of Marines in a boarding action against the station itself. Their shuttle crashed through a docking bay, and the humans emerged in full combat armor, weapons blazing. Syndicate security forces rushed to meet them, but they had never faced anything like this. Cole took a plasma blast to the shoulder. The wound was serious, deep enough to expose bone. Any other species would have collapsed from shock. Cole grimaced, switched his rifle to his other hand, and kept fighting. His squad moved through the station with brutal efficiency. They knew every corridor, every weak point, every defensive position. They had studied the station's layout for months before the attack. They had trained for this moment their entire lives. When they reached the command center, Commander Therax tried to flee. Cole caught him in a corridor, slamming him against the wall with one hand. "You cannot do this," Therax stammered. "The Syndicate will destroy you. You are just one fleet. We have thousands of ships." Cole leaned close. His face was covered in blood. Some of it his own, most of it not. "We have waited 10,000 years. We have trained 10,000 years. Every human alive knows how to fight, how to kill, how to die, if necessary. Your Syndicate murdered our ancestors, and we will not stop until every slave is free and every debt is paid." He released Therax and stepped back. "But we are not monsters. We do not kill prisoners. You will live, Commander. You will live to tell your masters what happened here today. Tell them that humanity remembers. Tell them that we are coming." Within an hour, the battle was over. The Syndicate fleet was debris. The station was captured, and Commander Nate Dawson broadcast a message across every frequency in Syndicate space. "We have returned. Free your slaves, release your prisoners, end your oppression, or we will end it for you." The message spread across the galaxy at the speed of light. Species that had lived under Syndicate rule for centuries heard it and felt hope for the first time in generations. The myths were real. The legends had returned. The war spread across Syndicate space, like fire through dry grass. Human fleets appeared at world after world, striking military bases, destroying defensive stations, and liberating slave populations that had suffered for generations. Captain Amy Sandoval commanded the Vengeance, a fast assault cruiser assigned to the liberation of the Korath system. The Korath were an aquatic species, peaceful by nature, who had been conquered by the Syndicate 800 years ago. Since then, they had been forced to work in underwater mining operations, extracting precious minerals from ocean floors, while their children were taken as hostages to ensure obedience. Amy had studied the reports. She had seen the images of Korath slaves, their bodies scarred from overwork, their spirits broken from centuries of abuse. She had read about the punishment camps, where disobedient workers were tortured until they died or submitted. She had learned about the breeding programs, designed to produce stronger workers with shorter lifespans. By the time her ship entered orbit above the Korath homeworld, Amy was ready to unleash hell. The Syndicate garrison was not prepared for what hit them. Human Marines dropped from orbit in armored pods, crashing through defensive shields, and landing directly in the middle of enemy positions. They fought with a fury that the Syndicate soldiers had never seen. Sergeant Hector Ruiz led his squad through a slave processing facility. The building was massive, designed to sort captured Korath into different labor categories before shipping them to mining operations across the system. When the humans arrived, the facility was holding over 2,000 slaves, waiting for transport. The Syndicate guards tried to use the slaves as shields, threatening to kill them if the humans did not surrender. His squad was trained for exactly this situation. They spread out, found angles that the guards could not defend, and neutralized every threat in under 3 minutes. When the shooting stopped, the Korath slaves stared at their liberators in disbelief. They had heard rumors of strange creatures attacking Syndicate positions, but they had not dared to hope that rescue was coming. Hector removed his helmet so they could see his face. The Korath had never seen a human before, but something in his expression made them understand that he meant them no harm. "You are free," he said simply. The words were translated through his helmet speaker system. "No one will hurt you anymore. We have come to take you home." An elderly Korath approached him slowly. Her body was bent from years of labor, and her skin was marked with countless scars. She looked at Hector with eyes that had seen too much suffering. "The old stories," she whispered. "My grandmother told me about creatures from a poison world, warriors who could not be killed, protectors who came from the stars. I thought they were just dreams." Hector knelt so that he was at her eye level. "We are real, and we are here. Similar scenes played out across the galaxy. On the desert world of Tandor, human forces liberated a species that had been used as disposable labor in toxic chemical plants. On the frozen moons of the Velith system, Marines rescued prisoners who had been abandoned in underground dungeons to die. On a dozen other worlds, slaves who had never known freedom suddenly found themselves protected by creatures from their oldest legends. Not every liberation was easy. The Syndicate fought back hard in some places, destroying facilities rather than letting them fall into human hands. Thousands of slaves died in the crossfire. But, for every one that fell, 10 more were saved. Captain Amy Sandoval personally oversaw the evacuation of a Korath breeding facility. The building held hundreds of children, separated from their parents and raised to be slaves. When Amy entered the main dormitory, she found them huddled together in terror, expecting punishment for the chaos outside. She crouched down and spoke softly. "My name is Amy. I am a human. Have you heard of humans?" One of the older children nodded hesitantly. "The guards said humans were monsters. They said you would eat us." Amy smiled gently. "The guards lied about many things. We are not monsters. We are here to take you to your families. Would you like to see your parents again?" The children began to cry, not from fear, but from hope. It was an emotion they had rarely been allowed to feel. While the liberations continued, Chancellor Voreth raged at his palace above Syndicate Prime. His advisors brought him reports of defeat after defeat, of systems falling, of slaves escaping, of military forces being destroyed by an enemy they could not understand. "How is this possible?" Voreth demanded. "They are one species, they have one fleet, we have controlled this galaxy for 3,000 years. One of his admirals, a veteran named Kreth, spoke carefully. "The humans fight differently than any species we have encountered. They do not retreat when wounded, they do not surrender when outnumbered. They take risks that no rational creature would take, and somehow they survive." "Then we will crush them with overwhelming force," Voreth declared. "Summon every ship in the Syndicate, every soldier, every weapon, every resource. We will gather at Syndicate Prime and destroy these humans once and for all." The order went out across Syndicate space. Ships began converging on the capital world, forming the largest fleet in Syndicate history. 3,000 warships, crewed by millions of soldiers, armed with weapons powerful enough to destroy planets. Admiral Henry Callahan received reports of the gathering fleet from human intelligence operatives scattered throughout the galaxy. He studied the numbers carefully, calculating odds, weighing options. His fleet numbered 400 ships. He was outnumbered nearly 8 to 1. By any rational calculation, attacking Syndicate Prime would be suicide. But Henry was human, and humans did not make rational calculations when justice demanded action. He gathered his commanders for a final briefing. The faces on his screen represented the finest officers humanity had ever produced. They had fought across a dozen systems, liberated millions of slaves, and lost friends and family in the process. They were tired, wounded, and angry. Henry spoke plainly. "We are outnumbered. We are outgunned. If we attack Syndicate Prime, many of us will die. I cannot promise victory. I can only promise that we will make them pay for every ship they destroy, every soldier they kill, every moment they continue to exist." The commanders nodded. They had known this moment was coming. "Humanity does not forgive," Henry continued. "Humanity does not forget. 10,000 years ago, they tried to exterminate us. They failed. Now we will show them what happens when you try to destroy the human race." The fleet prepared for battle. The human fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Syndicate Prime system. 400 warships against 3,000. Every tactical calculation said they should retreat, find another way. wait for reinforcements that would never come. Admiral Henry Callahan stood on the bridge of the Fury of Terra and watched the enemy fleet spread across his view screen like a swarm of angry insects. Each of those ships carried hundreds of crew members. Each was armed with weapons designed to destroy vessels much larger than his own. Together, they represented the combined military might of an empire that had dominated the galaxy for 3,000 years. Henry smiled. "All ships," he said calmly, "begin attack pattern Omega, and remember why we are here." The human fleet surged forward. Chancellor Vorith watched from his orbital palace with satisfaction. He had gathered every available ship for this battle, stripped defenses from a dozen systems to ensure overwhelming force. The humans had been brave, he admitted, but bravery meant nothing against superior numbers. "Destroy them," he ordered. "Leave nothing but debris." The Syndicate fleet opened fire. Thousands of weapons blazed across the void, filling space with plasma and missiles and energy beams. Any normal enemy would have been vaporized in the first volley. But the humans were not normal. Their ships scattered in seemingly random patterns, moving in ways that confused targeting systems and disrupted firing solutions. They flew through the storm of weapons fire, taking hits that should have destroyed them, and kept coming. Human pilots pushed their vessels beyond design limits, performing maneuvers that would have killed any other species. Commander Danny Vasquez led a squadron of 30 fighters directly into the heart of the Syndicate formation. His mission was simple but suicidal: take out as many command ships as possible before being destroyed. His pilots followed without hesitation. They had volunteered for this mission, knowing they probably would not survive. Every one of them had lost family to the plague 10,000 years ago. Every one of them carried memories passed down through generations of suffering. They were ready to die if it meant hurting the enemy that had tried to exterminate their species. Danny's fighter took a direct hit that tore off half his wing. Warning lights flashed across his cockpit. His computer screamed that he should eject, that his ship was breaking apart, that he was seconds from death. He ignored the warnings and kept flying. His target was a Syndicate command carrier, one of the largest ships in the enemy fleet. It controlled communications and coordination for an entire sector of the battle. If he could destroy it, he could create chaos in the Syndicate formation. The carrier's defensive guns tracked his approach, filling the space around him with deadly fire. His remaining wing was hit twice more. His engine was failing. Blood dripped from a wound on his forehead, blurring his vision. He did not slow down. At the last possible moment, Danny fired every weapon his fighter carried directly into the carrier's bridge. The explosion was massive, ripping through the command deck and killing everyone inside. The carrier began to drift, its coordination systems offline, its sector of the fleet suddenly without leadership. Danny's fighter crashed into the carrier's hull a moment later. He ejected at the last second, his escape pod tumbling through the debris field. He was recovered by a human rescue shuttle 20 minutes later, unconscious but alive. On the ground below, human Marines were dropping onto Syndicate Prime itself. Their mission was to capture key facilities, liberate remaining slaves, and force the Syndicate leadership to surrender. Sergeant Rachel Gomez led her platoon through the streets of the capital city. The Syndicate had expected the battle to remain in space, so ground defenses were lighter than they should have been. Still, every block was contested. Every building held enemies. Rachel had been fighting for 6 hours straight. Her armor was scorched and dented. She had been shot 3 times, and only the advanced medical systems built into her suit were keeping her on her feet. Every step hurt. Every breath was a struggle. She did not stop. Her platoon reached a government building that served as a regional command center. Inside, Syndicate officials were destroying records and preparing to evacuate. Rachel kicked down the door and led her soldiers inside. Syndicate security forces used furniture as barricades and fired from behind cover. Rachel's platoon cleared them room by room, floor by floor, taking casualties with every advance. When they reached the top floor, Rachel found a group of syndicate officials huddled in a conference room. They had been in the middle of destroying files when the humans arrived. Now they stared at Rachel with a mixture of fear and disbelief. One of them, an older official with elaborate robes, stepped forward. "You cannot do this. We are members of the Syndicate Council. We have rights under galactic law." Rachel laughed bitterly. "Galactic law? Your ancestors used biological weapons on civilian populations. They murdered children. They tried to wipe out an entire species. Do not speak to me about law." She gestured to her soldiers, and they began securing the prisoners. The files that had not been destroyed were collected for intelligence analysis. And Rachel moved on to the next objective. Because there was always another objective. Always another fight. Always more work to be done. In orbit, the battle reached its climax. The human fleet had taken terrible losses. Over 100 ships were destroyed or disabled. Thousands of soldiers had died, but they had inflicted far worse damage on the enemy. The Syndicate fleet was in chaos. Coordination had broken down as command ships were destroyed. Individual captains were making independent decisions, sometimes conflicting with each other. Panic was spreading through crews that had never faced an enemy this determined. Admiral Callahan pressed the advantage mercilessly. His remaining ships concentrated fire on critical targets, destroying supply vessels and communication relays, and anything else that held the Syndicate fleet together. By nightfall local time, the battle was over. Over 2,000 of their ships were destroyed or captured. The remainder fled into deep space, abandoning their capital to the invaders. Chancellor Voreth was captured in his palace by a squad of human marines led by Lieutenant Kyle Ortega. The Chancellor had been trying to reach an escape shuttle when Kyle's squad cut him off. Voreth knelt in chains before Admiral Callahan an hour later. His robes were torn. His dignity was gone. He looked at the human commander with something between hatred and terror. "What are you?" Voreth demanded. "What kind of monsters are you?" Henry Callahan looked down at the creature who had ruled this empire of suffering and slavery. He thought about his ancestors, about the billions who had died, about the 10,000 years of rage that had brought humanity to this moment. "We are not monsters," he said quietly. "We are humans. And we are everything your ancestors should have feared." He turned away, leaving Voreth in chains, and began giving orders for the occupation of Syndicate Prime. The battle was won, but the war was not over. There were still slaves to free, still systems to liberate, still justice to deliver. The humans had returned, and they were just getting started. The fall of Syndicate Prime sent shockwaves across the galaxy. For 3,000 years, the Syndicate had been the dominant power, crushing anyone who dared to challenge them. Now their capital was occupied, their fleet destroyed, their leadership in chains. And the species that had done this was supposed to be extinct. In the months that followed the battle, the human fleet continued its campaign of liberation. System after system fell, not to conquest, but to freedom. Slave populations were released. Prison camps were opened. Species that had lived under oppression for generations suddenly found themselves free for the first time. Commander Nate Dawson stood on a balcony overlooking the former slave quarters of Syndicate Prime. The buildings were being converted into housing for the freed populations, temporary shelter while they figured out where to go next. Thousands of beings from dozens of species moved through the streets below, some celebrating, some crying, some simply standing in disbelief. Lisa Brennan joined him on the balcony. She had been promoted to captain after the battle, though she still wore her injuries like badges of honor. Her arm was bandaged from a plasma burn, and there was a scar across her cheek that would never fully heal. The Korath elders have formally requested an alliance, she reported. So have the Velith, the Tandoori, and about a dozen other species. They want to form a new coalition with humanity at its center. Nate shook his head slowly. He had thought about this moment for years, imagining what it would feel like to win. But now that victory was here, it felt hollow somehow. The rage that had driven him for so long was fading, and in its place was something more complicated. We came to settle a debt and free the enslaved. Lisa nodded. I know, but they are not asking us to rule them. They are asking us to protect them, to make sure nothing like the Syndicate ever rises again. Nate was quiet for a long moment. He watched the crowds below, the freed slaves trying to rebuild their lives, the children playing in streets where they had once been prisoners. He thought about his ancestors, about the billions who had died from the plague, about the generations who had lived in quarantine on Earth while they prepared for this moment. They had survived so much, they had suffered so much, and now they had a choice about what came next. He activated his communicator. Admiral Callahan, this is Commander Dawson. I think it is time we started talking about the future. 6 months later, the Terran Protectorate was formally established. It was not an empire. Humanity had seen what empires did, how they corrupted and oppressed and destroyed. Instead, it was a coalition of free peoples, bound together by mutual defense and shared values. Humans served as protectors and mediators. They helped rebuild destroyed worlds and establish trade routes between species that had never been allowed to communicate under Syndicate rule. They trained local defense forces so that each world could protect itself. And they made it clear that they would respond with overwhelming force to anyone who tried to enslave or conquer others. Chancellor Vorath was tried for crimes against sentient beings. The trial lasted 3 months and produced evidence of atrocities spanning 3,000 years. When it was over, he was sentenced to spend the rest of his life on the prison world of Korath 7, a barren rock where he would have plenty of time to contemplate his failures. Many of his subordinates received similar sentences. Others were released after lesser trials, allowed to return to their home worlds as long as they never held positions of power again. The humans were harsh, but not cruel. They sought justice, not revenge. Captain Amy Sandoval, now promoted to Commodore, addressed a gathering of newly freed species on the anniversary of the liberation. Representatives from 40 different worlds had assembled on Syndicate Prime, now renamed Liberation Station, to celebrate the end of Syndicate rule. Amy stood before them in her dress uniform, her medals shining under the lights. She had never been comfortable with public speaking, but this moment demanded words that would echo through history. We returned because we remembered, she said. We remembered the betrayal, the poison, the dying. For 10,000 years, our ancestors passed down the stories of what was done to us. They made sure that no generation forgot the suffering, the loss, the rage. She paused, looking out at the assembled crowd. Dozens of species, thousands of individuals, all watching her with hope in their eyes. But they also passed down something else. They passed down memories of who we were before the plague. We were explorers who wanted to see every star. We were builders who wanted to create things that would last forever. We were protectors who could not stand by while others suffered. Amy's voice grew stronger. Our ancestors did not survive 10,000 years of agony so that we could become conquerors. They did not suffer and die so that we could build another empire on the ashes of the old one. They survived so that we could become something better, something worthy of their sacrifice. She stepped forward, her eyes shining with conviction. The war is over. The Syndicate is gone. But our work is just beginning. We will build something new together. All of us. Every species represented here today. We will create a galaxy where no one is enslaved, where no one is forgotten, and where no one has to face the darkness alone. The crowd erupted in cheers. Humans and aliens stood side by side, celebrating not just victory, but possibility. In the back of the crowd, an elderly Korath watched with tears streaming down her face. She was the same woman who had spoken to Sergeant Hector Ruiz in the slave processing facility 1 year ago. She had never expected to see this day, had never dared to hope that the legends were true. But they were true. The warriors who could not be killed had come. The protectors from the poison world had returned, and they had kept their promise. As the celebration continued, Commander Nate Dawson slipped away to a quiet observation deck. He stood alone, looking out at the stars that his ancestors had once explored, and his generation had reclaimed. He thought about all the humans who had died over 10,000 years. He thought about the children who would grow up in a galaxy without the Syndicate. He thought about the future that was now possible because of the sacrifices that had been made. For so long, humanity had been driven by rage and the need for vengeance. But standing there, watching the lights of Liberation Station glitter against the darkness, Nate realized that the rage was finally fading. In its place was something he had not expected. Peace. Not the peace of surrender or forgetting, but the peace of completion. The debt was paid. The promise was kept. The ancestors could finally rest. And humanity, forged in suffering and tempered by war, had found its purpose among the stars, not as conquerors or avengers, but as protectors of the weak and defenders of the free. The myths had become reality. The forgotten had returned, and the galaxy would never be the same.